Hello and welcome to Unstress. I'm Dr Ron Ehrlich. Today's episode affects everyone, and I mean everyone, from fetuses in utero to infants, children, teenagers and adults alike. We are all connected, so we are all affected. The topic is radiation, specifically radio frequency radiation or electromagnetic radiation, of which microwave radiation, as in Wi-Fi radiation, is part. Now, from the beginning of time, we have been exposed to radiation. The sun is literally the big one, and we all know it's life-giving. Without the sun, not much lives, not for very long anyway, and of course, we know too much of it can cause cell dysfunction, which many of us know as cancer. Well, the last 30 or 40 years has seen some huge additions to our electromagnetic exposure and total load, as you will hear. My guest today is medical practitioner and mother of two, Dr Pri Bandara. Pri beautifully introduces today's episode, tells a compelling personal story, and goes on to share some rather disturbing information we all need to take notice of. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Dr Pri Bandara. Welcome to the show, Pri.
Thank you, Ron. It's a great pleasure to be taking part.
Thank you. Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation since we first talked about this, and our subject today is something that everyone, whether they like it or not, is part of. So this is important for every single person. But I wondered if you might share with our listener a little bit about your own background. What brought you to this point professionally?
Okay, so our topic today is going to be about the health impact of wireless technologies, and particularly the agent radio frequency radiation, particularly microwave radiation emanating from all things wireless that we use very commonly these days. And how I ended up with the research in this area, it's actually a fascinating story that I think is important sharing with your audience. I was an academic, clinical and basic researcher. I worked for the Faculty of Medicine at UNSW first, and then at Sydney Uni while being based at Westmead and RPA hospitals. I took a break from my career with my first bab and subsequently joined the Westmead Children's Hospital. Though I had never planned to give up my academic career, I was compelled to in 2008 because my second bab wasn't well. So I would like to take a few minutes to go into a bit of details about his story.
Sure.
He was very unsettled from infancy, colicky, unable to sleep, crying and vomiting too much all the time. He was put on anti-reflux medications at 6 months of age, and this sort of went till he was about 3 years. Gastroscopy when he was about 2 years showed that his upper GI tract was fine, and there was no apparent reason for cause for his chronic reflux disease. And his insomnia was terrible. Even by 3 years, he was unable to sleep. Every day past, he would wake up around midnight and would cry till dawn.
Wow.
And then he would crash out of exhaustion. And this happened on a daily basis and caused an enormous amount of mental and physical stress to my husband and me.
I can just imagine. I mean, this is setting the scene for a real problem. Yes, go on.
Yeah. So we were simply helpless. Two professionals, who had a good life. Basically, we were in a desperate position, and every night we tried to comfort the distressed child, night after night. My husband would often take him for a drive around like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. to lull the little one to sleep. I couldn't go because we had another child at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I was worried rotten. I wanted my bub to fall asleep, but I did not want my husband to feel fall asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
And then he had to go to work and use his brain professionally. At least I could sort of, stay home and sort of recover a little bit during the day. So my little one also had a deranged immune system. He had 3 immune-mediated diseases by the age 3 years. He also had clear ADHD-like behavior, but I didn't seek a formal diagnosis of this, saying that it's just nothing but his, it's due to his chronic sleep deprivation. So he also had some peripheral neurological symptoms, because he used to say, I have ants in my legs, so frequently, from about 3 years of age. And his itchy eczema was giving trouble a lot. So it was a multitude of issues.
Wow.
And we consulted the best pediatricians specializing in various disciplines of medicine, but there was little relief. And other members of the family also had developed immune-mediated conditions, skin diseases, but there was no family history of them. And I was very focused on nutritional health. I really believed in good food. My children were breastfed for more than 2 years, and despite our struggles, we were still growing lots of organic fruits and veggies at home. And we really were on a healthy diet.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And then in March 2012, a friend just casually happened to share an information video made by Dr. Magda Havas, an environmental scientist at University of Trent University in Canada, in which she cautioned on adverse health effects caused by exposure to radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation, mostly microwave radiation from wireless devices. This got my attention.
I'll bet.
Yeah, and I thought, I had a chat with my husband. I organized someone to come and measure the levels of electromagnetic radiation at home, and we were told that we had a hot house with too much microwave radiation, particularly in our sleeping area. Now, I have to say that we were early adopters of wireless tech. My husband and I, we were both tech savvy. Hubby was from the first batch of robotics engineers at UNSW, so no wonder he had a love for fancy tech things. However, at this point, we decided to replace everything wireless with wired alternatives, and we did that in early April 2012. So, and to say, the magnitude of this, simple exercise, we reduced the levels of microwave radiation in our sleeping area by 2,070-fold.
Wow.
Not twofold. It wasn't a twofold drop,
2,070-fold. Okay. So a significant reduction.
Massive, and this by just getting rid of 2 devices in that area, a baby monitor and a cordless phone.
Wow. Oh my God. Our whole audience is okay.
and that was very interesting to me. And this is, we had such a big reduction because our home was still, we had perfect mobile phone reception, but we had a relatively low level exposure from like external sources like mobile phones, towers. But anyway, what happened after that was life-changing, although we simply could not believe at that time. Within a couple of weeks, our little one started sleeping well, and he started showing settled behavior. And his most notable was the his very itchy atopic dermatitis that cleared up, and we could actually discontinue our long-term dependence on topical steroid cream. So after a month, he was clearly very different, and I was gobsmacked. By this time, I was anyway reading a lot of scientific papers on RF EMR health effects. I bought instruments at this point and got myself trained on taking measurements and interpreting them. The changes in our son were profound. And that year we had held him back from starting school because of his health issues. And, by middle of the year, we basically even pulled him out of preschool to keep him in a stringently controlled home environment to monitor this newfound relief. So, we completely changed our lifestyle. So the child continued to thrive in every way. I remember very clearly once calling my husband at work and saying, "Can you believe, the little one sat and did some coloring for 40 minutes. And before that, he could not sit down, stay still for 5 minutes."
And we're talking, at this stage, he's like 4 or 5 years old.
He was 5. He was 5 by this time.
Yeah.
And he was actually due for a brain MRI with his pediatric neurologist. And I said to the neurologist, I think I have just found the cause of his immune disturbance and all these, neurological problems. And, I don't know, it's new. And I told him what it was. And the pediatrician, the neurologist said, that he didn't know anything about it. And I said, could we postpone his MRI by 6 months or 1 year? And he agreed with me. I mean, thankfully, he was someone who had worked with me at Westmead Kids, so he knew me and that I wasn't just a nutter. And and guess what? We never had to do that MRI.
Fantastic.
because my child got better and there was no need to follow up. And after one year, the neurologist said we don't need to follow up unless he gets get into trouble again. And we haven't for 7 years.
So you have really been in the trenches before.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
This, of course, must have catapulted you on a new trajectory.
Absolutely. And it was clear to me at that point, environmental health is critically important in this wireless age when there's a barrage of, new technologies, coming at us, on a daily basis.
Yep.
And I knew that, especially knowing that I wouldn't have known anything about this if Dr. Harris didn't take some time to create awareness with that video that came my way. So I knew that I had to focus on this issue to really investigate the science behind it and to protect particularly the younger generations, including my own children. Yeah. So in 2015, I joined a few like-minded Aussie scientists who had just sort of formed a professional non-profit organization called Oceania Radio Frequency Scientific Advisory Association, or ORSA. A retired radiation physicist, Victor Leach, who was a founding member of the Australasian Radiation Protection Society, took the initiative to build a database of peer-reviewed studies on radiofrequency EMR biological and health effects. And today, this database is the world's largest categorized database on RF health studies. So, we wanted to actually, from a very unbiased position, investigate the science, the mainstream science in this area.
Yep.
And I have been collaborating with a large group of scientists and clinicians from all over the world to, in the last 7 years, publishing in peer-reviewed literature and presenting at conferences. So now, before we go to the next, next question, can I quote a pioneering researcher in this area, Dr. Robert Becker, MD?
Yes, I know him well. Body Electric.
Oh, there you go. Well, again, I'm very pleased to hear that, Ron.
Good.
So he was twice nominated for the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
He said this around the turn of the century. I have no doubt in my mind that at the present time, the greatest polluting element in the Earth's environment is the proliferation of electromagnetic fields. And after 7 years of intense study in this area, I firmly believe in these prophetic words of Dr. Becker, and I actually think it is perhaps the biggest challenge to public health in the 21st century.
And when did he say that?
I think it was in an interview around the year 2000.
Right. So, for 4G, 3G, 2G, and it hadn't quite arrived at that point, but it was on the cusp. I mean, it was happening. Wow. I mean, here you are. I mean, you're no slouch. I say that with all due respect, of course. Here you are, academic researcher, your husband into robotics, you embracing Wi-Fi radiation in your very home. You were experiencing something which you had no idea. But I mean, really, that's a compelling story. And, let's go because, as I said, this is something, whether people like it or not, we are all part of this experience. Now, can you perhaps describe for us some of the common sources of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation? What are some of those common sources that we should be aware of?
Okay, well, mobile phones, cordless phones, they obviously communicate via this medium, electromagnetic radio frequency, electromagnetic radiation, and they're in the microwave frequency range. So it's same for Wi-Fi. And in fact, the frequency we use for Wi-Fi, 2.45 gigahertz radio frequency radiation, it is identical to the wave that we use in a microwave oven. The difference is the intensity. In a microwave oven, we use a very high dose to create a lot of thermal heat. But for wireless communication, we use a much lower level. That is, so the regulation of microwave radiation exposure is entirely dependent on heating effects. That's based on an old notion that only heating can be problematic to health, and if there's no tissue heating, then there's no there's no problem. And we now know, despite we still hold those exposure standards based on entirely thermal effects, we know that's an old obsolete notion. And there are lots of biological effects that happen without tissue heating, in the absence of heating. So every little wireless device, particularly the baby monitor was the biggest player in my my family's case.
And I'm guessing Bluetooth is another one.
Yes, and what about we had remote control, radio frequency remote controllers for toys, and our kids spend a lot of time sort of playing with them.
Yes.
and games consoles. These things are very, very common these days. And a couple of decades ago, a few decades ago, radio frequency exposure was almost exclusively occupational. Now it is everyone, every house has multiple emitters of microwave radiation. And the exposure happens pretty much from fetal stage.
Yeah. Well, you just said, by removing the baby monitor and the cordless phone, which I think a lot of our listeners would, think, well, pretty innocuous, really. 2,070-fold reduction in radiation exposure. That's massive. That's massive. What about, and how do these things like 3G, 4G, 5G, what does that mean? I was going to ask, should we be getting excited or worried? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is obviously worried. What are these differences in 3G, 4G, 5G? What does that mean?
Okay. Mobile telephony, the technology has changed rapidly over the years, and the frequencies used, and first we had analog phones, and now then digital. So there's a lot of technical changes, advancement that facilitated faster, better data transfer. Second generation, third generation, fourth generation, that's what those, G stand for. Mm-hmm. And so we've got currently fourth generation 4G that use the previously used frequencies for analog broadcasting, like TV, radio, not radio, I think it's just TV. But anyway, so it just refers to, there are different frequencies being used, but they're all within the radio frequency spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum. Mm. And they're all different types of, they're all microwave radiation of different frequencies. And some, there's research evidence showing that different frequencies inducing some, differences in biological responses. We know that because, say, for example, UV radiation, UVA is different to UVB, depending on the frequency. So, it's quite, it's like that. Yeah. There are some technical differences, but it is still very much the same age. But the difference is now with 5G upcoming, there's a need to put mobile phone base station, those antenna arrays, very close to each other. So there's a lot of concern about 5G because that's going to increase the number of base stations by millions, and there will be pretty much. See, at the moment, we are used to seeing one or two base stations per suburb, or
And these are typically big antennas on top of office or residential blocks.
Yes,
that are usually nicely encased so we don't see them too much, or...
You don't see them much now because they are getting smaller. You may have noticed the new 4G ones that are smaller boxes now they are coming to even residential streets on
telegraph poles.
Telegraph poles. Mm. And this is, the industry is gearing up for 5G as well, which will require a base station pretty much on every street. So in the coming years, this is what we will see. And there is already a scientist appeal in Europe against 5G, asking to halt 5G because there are a lot of health concerns already about existing exposure levels to radio frequency radiation, and 5G coming on top of existing 3G and 4G is going to add another layer. It's a massive layer of radio frequency exposure. So so there's...
Now, one of the things that's often fascinated me is that Einstein, of course, made the point that every atom in the universe is both mass and energy, and that means every atom in our human body. So, and you made the point that how have these levels increased over the last 20, 30 years? I mean, we've been around for millions of years in one form or another, but things have taken a dramatic change in recent years, to associate energy affecting every atom in the body, which includes our own. How have our energy exposures changed in the last 20 or 30 years? I mean, your room went up 22,000 times relatively innocuously. I can only imagine how much. Go on, tell us.
Yes. So actually, I published a paper with Professor David Carpenter from University of Albany in New York in the December issue of the Lancet Planetary Health, which has a diagram, a graph showing how I must give credit to a brilliant electrical engineer, Alistair Phillips from UK, who thankfully modified an old graph that he had created and for this publication. And that, if anyone can look up, it's free to download. If one goes to the Lancet Planetary Health and type in electromagnetic pollution, you might you'll find it.
We'll try and have links to that in our show notes.
That's wonderful, thank you. And that shows how this man-made environmental pollutant has increased in our environment rapidly in the last few decades. The natural levels that we get from the sun are extremely small and man-made, so our exposure is entirely from man-made radio frequency radiation. And the levels have gone up on average by about 10 to the 18 times. So that's a billion times, quadrillion times. And for some frequencies, this is actually exceeding even 10 to the 20. So, yes, so it's a massive increase in exposure. It's suddenly, mostly in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, so given that observation of every atom being energy and matter, it would be naive to think that this wasn't having some effect. You've already listed your sun's more than just some effects. What are some of the risks?
I would first, see a quote what the scientific evidence. As I said, the OSA database that the Australian scientists have created, collecting all the peer-reviewed scientific papers from all over the world. Last year, in a snapshot of this database, we found that out of the experimental studies, there were 1,283, that is 67% of 1,913 experimental studies showed a significant biological effect. So that's overwhelmingly showing the majority of studies showing that there is a biological impact, and the effects are wide ranged. And if you look at from a health point of view, there are neurological effects, immune effects, metabolic effects, endocrine effects, and you can explain these effects if you look at the biological effects that happen at a very fundamental level, in cells at cellular level. And what we have seen is consistent evidence of oxidative stress. I'm sure your listeners are well aware. Everybody seems to know about oxidative stress.
Well, go on. Just give us a 101 oxidative stress.
Okay.
Because we know we take antioxidants.
That's right. We take,
to combat oxidative stress. But tell us a little bit about oxidative stress.
Our kale salads or wheat germ juice drinks, all of these things, fruit and veg, really provide antioxidants to combat what's called reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species, which are, as the name implies, highly reactive chemical species that are generated in our cells as part of normal biological functions, maintaining life. And if the balance between reactive oxygen species and the antioxidant levels in our cells that counter the harmful effects of reactive oxygen species, if that balance is disrupted in favor of reactive oxygen species, then we create oxidative stress. It's the phenomenon very well known to be implicated in the pathology of pretty much every chronic disease. And, we don't fully understand, exactly what goes on and in most of these disease pathologies, but we know that oxidative stress is implicated. Reactive oxygen species, if they are built up too much, they can damage important cellular constituents, from our genetic material, DNA, to proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, everything that makes us our building blocks. And if our building blocks, our tissue sustain constant oxidative damage, they obviously malfunction.
Yeah.
So,
resulting in stuff like cancer.
Absolutely. So,
which I think most people would acknowledge is a significant problem in our community. I mean, I think the statistics, I don't think anybody listening to this wouldn't know somebody within 1 degree of separation who has not had cancer. So that's a result of imbalance at a cellular level. Yep.
That's right. Now, I think for Australians, we need to be particularly serious about cancer prevention because as per latest data from the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, we are the nation with the highest cancer rate out of 185 countries in the world.
Wow.
And yes, yes, we are. We've got the gold medal for that. That's something that we cannot be happy about.
Wow, that is very interesting. Australia has the highest
rate of cancer in the whole world. Now, the thing is, I have a different life, and as you said, here in Australia, we know, everybody knows someone who suffered cancer. But the thing is, I spent my first 20 years, in the first 2 decades of my life in Sri Lanka, very different place. And, you know what? There was only one family friend who developed cancer and died in that, 2 decade, and there was no one that we knew. And even today, when I look, so I always compare, I'm as a researcher, I look at the different factors that may have caused this difference. Now, out of the 185 countries, Sri Lanka is in the 176th place, so very low cancer. Okay,
Yep.
So what I observed as a youngster, everybody dreaded the word cancer, because it was sort of unheard of back those days. But unfortunately, cancer rates have picked up rapidly in Sri Lanka in the last couple of decades. So, anyway, in Australia, we need to be, of course, diagnosis and treatment aspect that's important. But we really need to find the causes, the root causes, and try to effectively control them to prevent cancer. Now, speaking of oxidative stress, can I tell you something? Now, I presented focusing on oxidative stress related studies. These were peer-reviewed studies done in different countries. There was only one study, unfortunately, from Australia, from University of Newcastle, which was a positive study that found that mobile phone radiation could cause oxidative stress and DNA damage in sperm. So that was a 2009 study, I think. But, that was the single contribution from Australia to the 242 peer-reviewed studies on oxidative stress, caused by the studies investigated radio frequency radiation exposure. And 216 out of them, that is a whopping 89%, found that, this is with empirical evidence that either the exposure increased oxidative damage to cellular components like DNA, or reduced antioxidant levels, which also indicates that there is oxidative stress.
Yep.
Or both. And in some studies, pre-treatment with an antioxidant prevented or reduced the subsequent damage caused by exposure to wireless radiation or radiofrequency radiation.
Right. Okay.
Yes. And some of, a few studies are human studies, but most studies are, rodent studies, I'm sure.
And those antioxidants would be things like vitamin C.
Yes, you're right. And
vitamin E.
I'm not sure if there was one with this with vitamin E supplementation, but clearly melatonin was one that was used with there were significant effects.
Yep.
Now the interesting thing is, now I presented this overview of these 242 studies at the annual conference of the Australasian Radiation Protection Society. And this paper was subsequently published in their official journal, Radiation Protection in Australasia. Now, this challenges the current position of our Radiation Safety Agency, ARPANSA, that had done a review. And, in the conclusion about, I must say, unfortunately, only one reviewer was responsible for, doing the entire experimental study review. I quote, this was the conclusion. Many recent in vitro experiments reporting RF effects have pointed to the production of reactive oxygen species as a possible link between RF exposure and adverse bioeffects. However, the putative link between RF energy and altered ROS production remains tenuous. But what we found, and we showed with empirical data, is completely different. That radio frequency at currently permitted level overwhelmingly induce oxidative stress. So it's a bit of a
now this is so interesting, isn't it? Because the logic tells us that we'd be naive to think it doesn't have an effect. The studies overwhelmingly show it does have an effect, and yet, from a regulatory perspective, and here we are in Australia, top of the list. How are we comparing as a country? When we compare ourselves to, say, the US, UK or Europe, how do we compare in terms of reducing that public exposure?
Okay, very good question, Ron. Now, Australia, UK, USA, and, Canada, New Zealand, we follow the guidelines of a professional body called IGNIRP, International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. It's a small NGO based in Europe, and their guidelines, which only prevent tissue heating, is still our exposure standard.
Wow.
After 20 years. Okay.
Yep.
Now,
so basically they're saying if you don't heat up tissue, this other radiation is fine.
That's right.
Wow. And that's our regulatory body that we're basing our regulation.
Right. And in fact, however, many countries, particularly, actually, it was the Russians who pioneered the bioeffects research, and their standards followed also by, China and many European countries. So for Russia and China, their exposure standard is 100 times less or more stringent than Australia. And there are other countries like Italy and many continental European countries have at least 10 times more stringent exposure standards than what we have. Mm-hmm. In fact, India a few years ago reduced they were previously adhering to what we use here, ICNIRP standards. And they reduced it by tenfold, trying to sort of, but there is more than the standards, despite the differences in standards. If you look at what comes out of the devices that we use, they're very similar and they're way below the standards. So even if you reduce the standards by, 1,000 times, still there's a problem.
And particularly when you consider that historically, I think you mentioned 10 to the 18 times higher, that's a billion times higher man-made yes. radiation, tinkering around the edges of 100 times or 1,000 times is kind of just tinkering around the edge of a pretty major problem. I mean, I've know that I think I'd heard that the World Health Organization has now classified Wi-Fi radiation as a class 2B carcinogen, which means it possibly could cause cancer. Is that right?
Yes. So now there are two arms of the World Health Organization that has looked at radiofrequency health effects. The IARC, the International Agency for Cancer Research, is the one that appointed a panel of experts in 2011, and they concluded, there's credible evidence, but they couldn't be absolutely sure because there were possible biases in, some of the studies. For example, the studies that investigated mobile phone use and brain cancer, the use was estimated by questioning these people, and often people can forget how much they use the phone. So because of that uncertainty, it was given a possible, like a 2B possible carcinogen category. However, what's really important to mention is that since 2011, the newly emerged research has very strongly, supported that evidence. And now there are published reports where experts have shown how this agent can now meet the what's called Bradford Hill criteria for causality. That's something we look at in cancer. So it meets the requirements to be classified as a known carcinogen. I know when I say this, there will be a lot of people who would say, no, I doubt it. Still the evidence is not clear. But especially last year, there was very strong evidence that came from the National Toxicology Program of the National Institutes of Health, USA. They conducted a study that took a bit over 10 years, and it was at a cost of $30 million US. It's a large study exposing rats and mice to radiofrequency radiation. And it was only last year that they released the data after very stringent peer review. And they showed that there was clear evidence. That's their highest category of evidence. Clear evidence of, there's a type of tumors called schwannoma. They are arising out of the Schwann cells that encapsulate our nerves. And that's very important because, and there was also evidence of glioma. Now, gliomas make most of the brain tumors, the brain cancers in humans. Now, these two tumor types that were increased in the irradiated rodents in rats are the same two types of cancers that have been found to be occurring at a higher rate with an increased risk in association with mobile phone use in humans. So that really strengthens the existing evidence.
So it's moving it into not just category 2B, possible carcinogen, but actually the next step up is category 2A, which is probable, and the highest is category 1, which is known carcinogen. Look, what a story this is that we've covered here today. Your own personal one, your background in science, your search for knowledge, and some of these statistics are just mind-boggling, to say the least, and I'm not sure whether we could feel reassured by our regulatory bodies. So if we had to now give our listener a few tips, say 3-4 tips for minimising their own exposure, because ultimately I think most of my listeners would now realise that taking control of your own health is the best alternative. If you're waiting for regulatory bodies, you may be waiting too long. What are a couple of things that people can do to minimise their exposure to this electromagnetic radiation?
Okay, there are very practical measures we can take to substantially reduce our exposure. Now, I don't want to create, a panic here. We don't have to throw away our mobile devices. I use a mobile phone too, but I use it very carefully now. The recommendations given by many medical and scientific organizations, for example, the European Academy for Environmental Medicine and its American counterpart, and even government agencies like, for example, Israeli Ministry of Health, these organizations have given very clear instructions to reduce exposure by preferentially choosing wired connections. For example, instead of relying on a mobile phone, on a cordless phone for regular phone calls, use a corded, like a wireless, the wired phone, and you can drastically cut down your exposure. And let's keep the mobile phones for short-term communications when we are out and about. And in the same way, at homes and schools, we can use safer wired internet for computers through an Ethernet connection instead of using Wi-Fi. And in fact, a lot of people don't know that many continental European countries have given recommendations for schools to use wired computers, wired internet instead of Wi-Fi. In fact, France in 2016 banned all wireless devices, including Wi-Fi, in small children's facilities. And they restricted use of older students, use of wireless Wi-Fi for up to 3 hours per week. But in contrast, Australia, on a world scale, there was a study conducted by the OECD in 2015, and that showed Australian students use the internet more than any other country that took part in this international survey for schoolwork. And most of this actually is through Wi-Fi. So it is, quite likely that we have very high levels of exposure here in Australia. And it's prudent at this stage with the existing evidence to wire where possible and reduce, and turn off.
That would include, because it's very common now to have speakers put in ceilings or walls that are Wi-Fi, and everybody thinks, isn't it terrific? We haven't got any wires. I can imagine that is another factor. And of course, you mentioned child monitoring, baby monitors. I mean, God, where were we before we had baby monitors? How did babies ever survive? How did we survive, Pri?
Yes.
What about distance from, this idea of putting the phone to one's ear or resting the laptop in one's lap?
That's right.
What about distance?
You mentioned the most important point that I actually forgot to mention. Distance is really your friend because your exposure mostly comes from your personal devices. That is, unless you live close to a mobile phone tower or a radio transmitter or something like that, like on one of those big broadcast towers. Now, keeping the phone away from your head using speaker function or a headset will reduce your exposure. When it comes to headsets, instead of a wire connected to the mobile phone, there are newer what's called air tube headsets, and those earphones transmit the least amount of radiation to the head. So speakerphone or headsets, but don't put the mobile phones against your head. In fact, if you look at the manufacturers' manuals, mobile phones and even iPads. Now, iPads emit very similar levels to mobile phones. They all have minimum distances that the industry has specified, but these instructions are buried, deep. It's very hard to find, and nobody seemed to be aware of them. And so these distances, the minimum distance is hardly met by real-time usage. People just keep these devices against the body, which shouldn't be done. And, those instructions are there not just to protect the manufacturers from, legal, implications in future, but also to, protect consumers. And these should be, people should be made aware of it. But unfortunately, there's no such public awareness campaign happening in Australia at all.
And does texting generate less radiation than? Yes.
It's a really good way to actually. That's how I communicate mostly when I have to use.
We were going to do this interview via texting, Pri, but I just didn't think it would have the same appeal to our listener. We will have transcripts though.
No. I use a landline phone, which is an old-fashioned corded phone now. But I used, cordless phone for 12 years. But I'm very serious about
I know
my family's.
I know you came up to my surgery and you looked around out the window, and you mentioned there was also some shielding that can go on windows.
Yes, especially in high density areas where there are, a lot of external powerful transmitters like mobile phone base stations. People who are concerned, who are aware, often use like a special film to block out this like the microwave radiation coming through the windows. There are various, and that is an effective, way to reduce the levels inside a home or in an office. But there are also, I should mention, there are a lot of gadgets that are, simply, making a lot of money for their commercial providers, but not really giving you protection. I mean, I've seen people sticking various, crystal, whatever, things on their mobile phones. Mm-hmm. And there's very little, research on those. And a lot could be just gimmicks.
Yeah. Now, listen, as I say, we've covered some great territory here, and I think you may have answered this already, but look, if you were taking a step back from your role as a researcher, and we're all on this health journey together through life, what do you think the biggest challenge is for people on that health journey in our modern world? I think the answer is obvious here, but
yes. So, no, they like if you look at where we are now in the 21st century, as electrochemical beings, we've evolved with nature. Sunlight is our natural source of electromagnetic radiation, but we've created very different electromagnetic radiation since that bright idea of Edison some 100 years ago about the light bulb, and we've drastically changed that natural environment around us. And these days, our lifestyle, we've become, like a lot of us, night owls. We keep up till late, surrounded by our digital screens and whatnot, and artificial light. And these collectively, electromagnetic radiation, in the form of, today our focus was radio frequency radiation that we use for wireless communication, but also, there's sort of more talk about blue light coming from these screens. They collectively disrupt the production of melatonin, a very important hormone that regulates our sleep and also provides excellent antioxidant protection to us. If with our modern lifestyle, we are disrupting our day-night cycle, by chemically sort of changing the biology of melatonin, etc. Unfortunately, that is a challenge to our long-term health, particularly the younger generations, keep up till very late, and they wake up late, and they in fact often miss the beneficial electromagnetic radiation in the form of sunlight, morning sunlight, to make vitamin D. And so there are things that we, with the knowledge we have, we can incorporate very practical changes to our lifestyle to maximize our natural exposures, the beneficial exposures, and to minimize these harmful, unnatural exposures, while being on a healthy diet, being active, and doing all the other things that we should be doing. Another challenge in the modern age is that we are living in a time of information overload. I know the internet is fantastic. It is a fantastic source of information, but at the same time, there's a lot of misinformation on the internet, and people don't know what to believe. And it's not helped by various commercial conflicts of interest, people and organizations pushing, various things, products and programs with claimed health benefits. But so it is a challenge for people to figure out what's really good and what they should be doing particularly to prevent disease. And I think considering that's why we actually need organizations like the ACNIM, the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, of which now you are the latest president.
Well, there we go. There's the official announcement on my podcast. Well, listen, it's one of the reasons. It's thank you very much. It's one of the reasons why we do this podcast, to help people wade through that, and it's one of the reasons why I actually do feel rather passionate enough to become president of that Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. Pri, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your story and your knowledge and expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share this information with your audience, Ron. Cheers.
The issue of environmental stress is a big and important one, whether we are talking about chemical load, as we have in many episodes. Professor Mark Cohen, Nicole Bilgemer, Alex Stewart and Kate Harris, or those early episodes I did with Lynn McLean, you could be excused for thinking if it's out there being sold, the government must have checked it's safe. But it's sobering to learn that that's not always the case, and even more sobering to learn that a lot of the research that informs those government decisions and regulations are conducted by the very industries that stand to benefit financially from the sales. Now, it's worth mentioning the precautionary principle. If something has the potential to cause harm, it's best avoided until independent studies verify its safety. Europe is very big on the precautionary principle, and it's why Wi-Fi radiation has been removed from many schools, because like so many things, young people are the most vulnerable. Another way to go, which is the way things work in the US and to a similar extent in Australia and the UK, is put things out there. If they cause a health problem, you can take the manufacturer to court and let the courts decide the validity and extent of your case. Well, I know which way I'd like to go. It's important to know that making informed decisions can reduce your toxic load by 80 to 90%. That is true of chemicals you are exposed to, and also the degree to which you expose yourself and your family to the effects of electromagnetic radiation. Now, I do carry my phone in my pocket close to my body, and as a result of today, I'm just going to need to pull out that man bag I haven't been using often enough, but I will most certainly be putting my phone on airplane mode and switching off the Wi-Fi Bluetooth until I get it out of my pocket or away from my body. My God, I'm going to be disconnected for a half an hour or an hour. How scary is that? I'm going to install a master switch at home as well to easily turn off my internet while I sleep. And of course, keeping all electrical appliances away from my head at night is another one I have been doing. Look, we can make choices that do make a big difference. Now, also, don't forget to download the Unstress app from the App Store or from Google Play. Just search Unstress and then download it. Some great resources, and of course, you will know immediately when the latest episode is posted. Also, while you are there, why not leave a review on the iTunes about the podcast? Look, I've got a very simple goal for this podcast, not only to empower you to better health, but to make the planet healthier too. The two, as you know, are inseparable. So share the message and the love. So until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an